Today, class, we'll be talking about Walt Whitman, America's poet. Whitman was born in Long Island, east of New York City. He was the second of 8 children, and he was born in this house. And today you can visit that house as well as the museum that is there on the grounds of the home. He was an early apprentice as well as a school teacher. As a young man, Whitman was a journalist and worked for a prestigious paper, the Brooklyn Eagle, becoming its chief editor, in fact. However, he had disagreements over slavery with the owner and was subsequently fired from his position. Many influences on Whitman and his work, on his poetry. Perhaps the most influential is the Italian opera. As it says here, Whitman said, "Were it not for the opera, I could not have written Leaves of Grass." He also was a fan of Shakespeare, and he also read his Bible, of course, and here's where he received a lot of training for his poetry. We see the rhythms of the Bible in his poetry. His life in New York City included hanging out at a place no longer in existence called Pfaff's. It was down on Broadway in Greenwich Village, down in a basement, and it was home to the city's bohemian crowd. Writers and artists would have their dinners there. He also met celebrities. Edgar Allan Poe, Henry David Thoreau came to meet him. He also was friends with the opera stars. Here he walks the streets and observes the American populace as they go about their business. Famously, he wrote about the blab of the pave, or what the people sounded like. Also, he commuted a lot from Brooklyn, so he took the Brooklyn Ferry. Today, of course, we have the Brooklyn Bridge, one of the oldest bridges in America, connecting Long Island to Manhattan. In 1855, he publishes what would become his opus, his Leaves of Grass. There were 12 poems in all. 3 of the famous ones, Song of Myself is the main poem, I Sing the Body Electric, and The Sleepers. These are all untitled in this first edition. There were only 795 copies printed. However, over the course of his lifetime, he did publish 7 editions of Leaves of Grass. Again, that's one of those numbers. You may see other numbers for the number of editions, but we'll go with 7. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson, whom we've studied, was a big influence on Emerson. His transcendental ideas certainly influenced his work. And after the publication of Leaves of Grass, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote this famous literary letter to Whitman, welcoming him at the start of his what must be a great career, and the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that he found in Leaves of Grass. Like Emily Dickinson, we'll see Whitman's poetic style has 3 parts we'd like you to know. The first is free verse. This is based on really the sounds of the American voice, the American language. So it has little metrical regularity in rhyme. The second is cataloging, where Whitman piles up images, one atop the other, like a catalog. Here's an example of the types of workers that we see in one of his poems. The third element of his poetic style is the repetition of initial grammatical structures, or parallelism, also known as anaphora. So we'll see Whitman using that as part of the cataloging, as part of setting a mood, perhaps. Some of the themes in Whitman: power of love, his imaginative connection with others. You will find him under your boot soles today, he writes in one poem. He has a faith in our country, certainly the belief in the powers of nature, and he also exalted the human body. He enlisted his help for the Civil War. After his brother was wounded, he moved to Washington, D.C., and there he found a great need to help injured soldiers in the hospitals around Washington, D.C. And he was very much well regarded there for his time, for his care, for his helpfulness. Here's a quote from one of the soldiers who wished the Bible thumpers would get out of the tents and let Whitman come over with his candies and stories and pipes and tobaccos. And there's an extra credit question. Please write that again at the bottom of the second page of notes. Did Whitman and Abraham Lincoln ever meet? It's a fascinating question. We don't think they ever met, though Whitman certainly watched Lincoln as he would ride through town. He went to the White House several times, even securing a position in the government, but we don't believe that they ever actually met face to face. Though it does seem that Lincoln did know of the book Leaves of Grass. And two of Whitman's more famous elegies or Lincoln poems are When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed and Oh Captain, My Captain. Perhaps you had to memorize that in middle school. Winding down now, the good gray poet, we see that by the final deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, there were actually now 383 poems in Leaves of Grass. And famously, Whitman called America the greatest poem. And the final slide deals with Camden, New Jersey, where Whitman bought a home. The home is still standing today. It serves as a museum to his legacy, and it's just across the Delaware River from downtown Philadelphia.